My name's Bob Carpenter. I was a flight engineer with 36 Squadron on the A model and the H model, and from 1976 through till 1991. I came to the C-130 in 1976. It actually came in 1958, and but I joined the Air Force in 1963, so I saw it in many areas, especially when I was in Vietnam and it was doing the resupply. But it was always the truck, and I never thought at the beginning of my career that I would end up being a flight engineer, because that's not where I started. But I did manage to get on an A model Hercules when I did my resting country for 3 days during the Vietnam War. And it put something into my mind from that point. And so it was always iconic. And it always gave me memories. And when I got the opportunity to fly on it, because originally you only could become a flight engineer from the engines and airframes trade, and I was the first radio technician to become a flight engineer in 36 Squadron, and I did that straight after they opened it up to allow RADTechs to apply for the job. When I went on the trip, I didn't go back to Australia. It was only for 3 days, and it took me over to Malaysia for the first ever time. So it was lots of different experiences. First a passenger, and because there were not very many passengers on board coming out of Phan Rang to Butterworth, I got to come up into the cockpit for the first ever time, and it was amazing to see all the dials and switches and all the rest of it. And it left an indelible memory. And so after 3 days, of course, it was another A model that took me back into Phan Rang and started my desire to want to be involved with it. Yeah, I think that the Hercules was revolutionary because it was really the first turboprop aircraft, and it came after the Second World War when they started developing things. And the interesting part was it met and exceeded all of the specifications that were made for an aeroplane. So it really was revolutionary, and that's attested by the length of time that it's going, and it's still going today. I think that the testament towards the Hercules in general is both the people that work on it, and of course I'm biased from an Australian point of view, but the aircraft itself, it has just been expanded with technology, the changes, and the shape of it realistically hasn't changed since 1958 when we first got them. And the way that we look after them and the way we operate them, it's just formidable in the way that it's been over all those years. The interesting thing about the things that stood out to me on the Hercules was realistically, I came across from the bomber world and the F-111s and the modern aeroplanes, and I walked back in years to an aeroplane from the 50s. And that A model, it just worked. And this is in the days before computers and all of those things. And you really did need to fix that aeroplane and keep it going. But then, as we moved into the H model, and that's when technology started to come, and it's just improved the aeroplane ever so much right from that beginning. But when I first saw it, yes, it was amazing looking at all the dials and everything else, but it was still like looking back almost at a museum piece, because it was already 20 years old at that stage. Well, when I compare all these aircraft and what it was like for me to be the operator sitting up there as the flight engineer, to get as an integral part of that crew, of that team of people, it's the teamwork, it's the people. Many of the other aircraft don't have that many people, and take into account that I'm talking about when there were 2 pilots, a navigator, a flight engineer, plus either 1 or 2 loadmasters down the back. It really was a team effort to make it work and make it sing. Well, the team that we had operating that aeroplane had to work as an extremely functional team. And it's not just the driving of the aeroplane, it's the way that you come together before work. And I don't mean just on the day, in your work environment and the whole squadron environment, and the way we looked after families and all the rest of it. We really were a Hercules family. And so you had to rely on these people that you're working with, because we got into a few tight situations over the years. And if you don't have faith in your team members, you are in a situation where you're just not relaxed and you can't do your job. And there's been a few of those situations. Well, one of the missions that we did that shows the capability of this airframe, and there's lots of things that in the big picture of it, in that Australia was working with the United Nations in 1989, and we were doing famine relief into Cambodia, taking resupply food into Phnom Penh. The interesting part here was we were refueling and loading the aircraft from the Paya Lebar Air Base in Singapore. That was their international airport at the time. We were parked beside the Concorde with a H model aircraft. We were then flying up over what we called Saigon at the time, and then down into Phnom Penh. We have 2 truckloads of food for all the Cambodians. From the time we landed and put the brakes on and emptied the aircraft of 2 truckloads, 30,000 pounds, we were rolling again in 2.5 minutes. And we did this. Each crew, there were 2 crews operating at a time, so a crew would operate one day, then have a day off. We were working for 20 hours a day, and the squadron managed to move 1 million pound of cargo with 1 aeroplane in 30 days. That shows me what this aircraft's capable of. The importance of the mission that we did was that it was a humanitarian effort. We were supplying the food for the Cambodians. Now, without getting into politics and all the rest of it, it was humanitarian. And this is what Australia's role with the Hercules has been for many, many years, in that we're the first in, we're the last out, and we've been involved in almost every situation where we operate with our neighbours. Operating way back in the early 80s, I think it was 81, we operated down to McMurdo in Antarctica, and we operated out of New Zealand, Christchurch. And now, in a second life, I actually have a model aircraft and I took a model aircraft and flew it off the ice shelf down in McMurdo, but we took it down in the back of a Hercules. And so, I mean, that's a interesting thing, but probably a more interesting one was when we flew the aircraft together with about 40 passengers over in 1981 to Charles and Diana's wedding. And we took all of the Australian representatives that were involved in the actual wedding. So for 10 days, we were in London while they were practicing. And then and we took the official Australian present for the couple and then come back home again. But again, it's showing that we can go anywhere in the world with this aircraft. There were more interesting cargoes that we carried at times, other than, I mean, we went with all the way to England, and realistically, it was just a box of cargo down the back. But one of the aircraft that I wasn't actually on this particular one, but I was part of one of the other aircraft. We were involved in taking the Kummel force, the PNG military. They got involved in a revolt on one of the islands with Jimmy Stevens. And after it was all over, they were given a present of a live pig. And that was for them to take home to PNG. And so they had to strap down a live pig in the back of the aircraft together with the troops.
Oh my goodness, the noise.
And the smell. Not from the pig.
The smell of a large number of men in the back of the Hercules is a unique experience.
It very much, the smell sometimes is very interesting when you have all of these people, especially if you're involved with the army and others that are coming out of places where they've been without normal showers, etc. The smells down the back are interesting. Because of where I live, close to the base at Richmond, we have a situation where I can sit around the pool and watch the Hercules and other aircraft flying in and out of Richmond and doing their airdrops and all the rest of it. And yes, it's the memories of, I used to be in that aircraft. And let's just say I enjoy my time close to the base at Richmond. The way that the missions evolved over the many years that I was involved. Now, in 1976, we were doing things like people probably can't remember, we used to do East Coast runs and trainers and all of this. And we carried a lot of passengers, and it was almost just a transport fleet. We were, you could go every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, you could go down to Laverton and across to Adelaide, and Wednesdays and Thursdays you could either go to Perth or you could go to Darwin. But over the years, that changed, and we started to become a lot more serious in our military role, and the tactical environment changed as it has over the years. And so all of those extra bits, we weren't able to do them as well, and they were decisions made by other people. But when we started using things like NVGs and working a lot more at night, and there was a major doctrine change in the way that we operated the aeroplane, and it was interesting to be part of that. There was an interesting situation where after going down to McMurdo, as we were coming out, we flew around Mount Erebus and we looked down into the crater. Now, 1 year before that, there had been a major air crash into the side of Mount Erebus. And then it was not too distant that I was on an aircraft, and we were operating those famine relief up into Cambodia. So you're on the bottom of the world, operating in the ice, and then you're up into, let's just say it was a hostile environment, as where there are lots of people with lots of guns whilst we're operating. So there were lots of changes, and it could happen on a day-to-day basis. The Hercules, and I found whilst we were operating it, it'd depend on the actual aircraft that you were flying on the day. And some aircraft, they operated better than others. For instance, we had an aircraft that went to America, and there were 2 engineers on it, myself and one other, and we were away for 3 weeks. And we put in 1 can of oil in a propeller in 3 weeks, other than normal refueling. That aeroplane just worked the way it should. And it was a pleasure. 2 months later, that same aeroplane, I took it away, and I just cannot remember where. Nothing worked. We ended up with hydraulic leaks. We ended up with propellers that were not sinking properly, etc. And you really worked hard. But that was that particular airframe at that particular time.